So we're going to be talking about etiology. We've covered neurological and neurophysiological etiologies in a reasonable amount of detail for the first look. But now we'll be speaking about how they interact with mechanical etiologies. We'll be using tennis elbow as the example case, simply because it's well understood by everybody, and we don't have to worry about the diagnosis and so on. You're going to find that there's two diagrams here, two flow charts. One of them basically looks at neurological, neurophysiological problems as etiologies, and the other one is mechanical. But you're going to find that the mechanical almost always leads to neurophysiological effects that do most of the damage. So this is a very brief introduction. It's early on in the program to teach this, and essentially it's to give you some familiarity with the topic and to let you know that it's not quite as simple as overuse syndromes and that type of thing. In fact, it's very much not about overuse syndromes in the way you normally think about it. There is overuse involved, but it's overuse that you wouldn't normally consider to be overused, but there is a predisposition in the tendon or the ligament or the bone or whatever tissue fails. There's a predisposition there for it to fail, and that predisposition is generally some form of degeneration, and we'll be looking at how that degeneration occurs. So, as I say, it's an introduction. Don't get too concerned about it. You'll be getting a lot more of this in the later stages of this class. Take care all. Bye-bye. We're going to be looking at neurological and neurophysiological etiologies in this slide, or if you prefer neuro, which I do, it's quicker. We're going to be looking at three etiologies. One is axoplasmic flow compromise, one is segmental facilitation, the other is reflex inhibition. Axoplasmic flow is a neurological problem. It's transport down the core of the nerve fibre. So this is going to be disrupted by compression, traction, torsion, kinking, anything that can warp the nerve. So this transports both synaptic vesicles and trophic nutrients to the end organs. So with synaptic vesicles, you're going to find synaptic failure. This will lead to force output weakness, and that's going to lead to overuse because the proprioceptive system is seeing the weakness as not being strong enough, which it is, of course, and it will try and make it stronger. So it'll be making the muscle work harder and harder, and you'll basically get an overuse syndrome, but it's hidden, it's not an obvious one. So this will lead to overuse. That causes degeneration of the tendon, and if there's a trigger applied, and it can be something as minor as a little bit extra effort or a little bit of an unusual effort, but a force that wouldn't normally be considered as causative, that can lead to pain. Possibly it may lead to nociception rather than pain, in which case you're then likely to get a mechanical issue coming up because the segment of facilitation is going to produce weakness, which will not protect the joints it should be protecting, which will then fail, give you reflex inhibition, and so on and so on and so on. Trophic malnutrition is going to lead directly to degeneration of the tendon, not through overuse, but directly. Then you need a trigger for it, and you're back into that cycle again. Segmental facilitation is neurophysiological. It's caused by, in my opinion anyway, nociception. It leads to force output weakness and hypertonus. Both of these can lead to overuse. The hypertonus by directly involving it, the higher tones that overuse, maybe. I have that little bit of a problem with that as being significant enough to cause this, but who knows, it can certainly be a contributor. And then the force output weakness more directly causing the overuse through proprioceptive failure. Degeneration of the tendon, trigger, and then pain on nociception, with the nociception causing more segmental facilitation, so on, so on, so on. Or there's reflex inhibition, which will lead to causes force output weakness, leads to overuse, degeneration of the tendon, trigger, and then pain again. So you can see they all come down to the same thing, basically. Degeneration of the tendon, and then a trigger applied to the top of it. You can see that this diagram is a lot more complicated than the previous one, and that's because mechanical failures basically occur via neurological, neurophysiological etiologies, with the exception of a previous injury to that tendon, which failed to heal properly and led directly to overuse. But that one's an obvious one. I'm not going to worry about it. So the abducted ulna is probably the most common cause of this. And this has been hypothesized to cause an ulnar shift in the carpals. Now, the most common and popular explanation of this, which I don't particularly like, is that it leads to an altered length tension relationship of the common extensor tendon and the muscles, which causes force output weakness, which leads to overuse degeneration. And then you go back through that cycle again with the degeneration and the trigger causing pain that we saw in the previous diagram. The reason I don't like this very much is because the alteration and the shift of the carpals isn't very high, and there's a lot of extensibility in the carpal muscles, in the flexors and extensors of the carpal muscles. So how much of an increase in the shift must there be to cause an increase in length tension? Plus the fact you actually don't need an awful lot of movement here from neutral to be able to cause this. So I'm not a great lover of this, but it's the most popular explanation out there. The other explanation that I prefer is that the ulnar shift of the carpals leads essentially to an extension hypomobility of the whole wrist. Now, this isn't a subluxation of the wrist. This is the fact that you can't get the wrist into radial deviation and extension because everything's been shifted ulnarly. So it's a purely mechanical reason, not a pathological reason why you can't get that extension. But this will lead to proprioceptive failure, which will cause an overuse syndrome again, because the proprioceptive system is trying to get these muscles to get stronger and stronger and stronger, can produce a stronger contraction that it needs, which leads to overuse and degeneration. Of course, the abducted ulna can also lead to reflex inhibition, which causes force output weakness, which leads to degeneration, and then the same thing. So you've got two angles coming in here, and possibly even a third one, because if the abducted ulna is nociceptive, not painful, but nociceptive, that can also lead to segmental facilitation, which again causes force output weakness, which will lead to overuse syndrome. We can have that ability to extend the wrist directly caused by wrist extension by mechanical dysfunction, and this can lead to reflex inhibition and segmental facilitation, and of course the same proprioceptive failure that the non-biomechanical dysfunction has caused. So you can get force output weakness from both facilitation and reflex inhibition, and of course the segmental facilitation is also going to cause hypertonus, which is going to also increase the overuse syndrome, maybe. And so they'll follow the same route through here. But a flexion hypomobility can do the same thing, but this time via nociception and reflex inhibition coming up this way, both of them causing force output problems and overuse.